Hi, as Zeta mentioned, I'm Eric Wilkinson. I am one of the 4 therapists in UK Work-Life, or it's Work+Life Connections. We were formerly in the Department of Work-Life. We're now in Health and Wellness. It's nice to be here with everybody. I will, on the front end, encourage folks, if you're someone who likes to take notes, to have some writing utensils available, or you can use like a notepad on your phone. Um, I hope that this can be interactive and that there'll be opportunities for kind of brainstorming around your own personal self-care. Before we started the recording, I just want to note there was a lot of wonderful self-care practices that were put in the chat. 3 of them that I will just speak very briefly to. One is, for those that know me, I'm a big proponent of doing things out in nature. A lot of folks put going on walks. There's a nice body of research around Shinrin Yoku, the Japanese practice of forest bathing, where spending time amongst trees, and the way I like to describe it is just being childlike again, allowing yourself to be interested in your sensory experiences, whether it's looking at the clouds or feeling the sun on your face, looking at the trees, following an insect around, listening to the sounds, laying down in the grass. This experience of just immersing yourself in your sensory world. There's nice research around how this improves overall mood. It increases your sense of connection to others, decreases anxiety and stress, depression. So some folks mentioned that. Somebody else also mentioned singing songs. You know, in many ways, this is intuitive, but we know that the neuroscience has emerged to support that singing songs is wonderful for the mood. It can really help you to regulate. It can help you to release stress, to release pain. Again, to feel connection to your humanity and to other people. So singing songs, big proponent of that. Whether you're a good singer or not a good singer, it doesn't matter. And then there was one other one that was just really interesting because it's something I was just reading. I've been doing some reading in art space research, and the idea of reading books. And particularly, I saw some research that shows that when people read fiction, that especially if they do deep reading, there's this ability. It's almost like we put ourselves within the story. So it's really engaging to our sensory experiences. But what I found to be particularly interesting was that after reading a novel for several weeks after, there's increased connectivity in different regions of our brain that continues on several weeks after finishing a novel. So not only is there value in it in the moment, but there's also probably some value in there in terms of your brain health after reading, particularly reading novels. So let me go ahead and get into this. Here's our general learning objectives. We're going to focus on 5 dimensions of psychological well-being that were defined by Seligman in 2012. It's within the positive psychology tradition. These are 5 dimensions that contribute to self-care. We're also going to think about 6 domains or 6 different areas of different types of self-care practices. As I mentioned, if you do have writing materials to take notes, that's great. There's going to be different times where I ask folks. I loved all the responses we got in the chat. So if you respond to questions in the chat, Zeta is willing to read those out loud to me so that I can know when you guys are responding. What I would like to first do, and this is a chat exercise, is if you can put in the chat just something that so far this day that you've noticed about your day, an experience you had this morning that was pleasant or interesting in some way. So it could be maybe something you ate or drank. It could be something that you saw if you spent some time outdoors. It could be interactions with other family members or pets. It could be putting on your socks and shoes. Some experience this morning that you found to be interesting or pleasant. Doesn't matter how small, the smaller the better. You can put that in the chat, and then Zeta, if you can read those out loud.
There's a few coming in. One says, whoo, I said a few and then they all started coming in. So you know how the screen starts to move on you. Brushing my long-haired cat, watching cardinals nest in the tree outside my window, listening to the birds singing outside the window, a wordle or quordle, resting in the shade outside, listening to birds sing while having Bible study, brushing my son's hair, sitting outside for 5 minutes listening to birds. There's a lot of birds listening happening today. Saw the neighbor's dog get excited when he saw me walking to my car. Oh, wow, that's a nice realization. Um, I got a text from a friend about taking a walk tomorrow, watching my kiddo cuddle with our dog. Husband brought coffee while I was Zooming, watching my dogs play in the yard. My husband and I began discussing a gift for his mother's 80th birthday. 6-year-old giving me a hug. And it rained this morning about an hour after sunrise. I went out on the deck to drink coffee and a rainbow appeared. Nice. I love catching those rainbows. Let's see, laying down and snuggling with my cats. The last 2 of 5 wild baby bunnies in our strawberry container garden in our backyard had left the nest. Okay. Wow, lots of good
So
answers.
I was just listening to all that list. I think first of all, let me just say I just feel good listening to that list. There's a lot of nature engagement that was described in there. A lot of, as Zeta mentioned, several people appreciated listening to birds. Again, we know that listening to birds is one of the more calming things for our nervous system. Human beings, we really love and appreciate, and it's good for our overall emotional, mental health to listen to birds. So that's a great practice. There was also several references to appreciating family members, appreciating pets. In those moments that you were able to tune in, you are present with yourself, you are connected with yourself. And I would argue that each one of those are an example of self-care, in that the more that we can kind of approach our days by tuning into our experiences, particularly when there's, we want to be open to all of our experiences, because that's how, in any particular moment, we can be aware of what's going on with us or what we may need or what others may need. So it means being open to both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. But particularly when we experience something that is pleasant, allowing ourselves to really savor that, to notice that. And that is a self-care practice that the more that we can kind of hopefully bring this out throughout the entire course of our day, the more we benefit from it. I'd like to do an abridged, inspired meditation practice very briefly. It's taken from Tara Brach. It's just inspired by Tara Brach. It's not her meditation, but if you do want to hear the actual meditation, you can go to her website. There's also a direct link in the PowerPoint that will be shared. But this is just to try to generate some warmth, which I feel like there's already a lot of warmth in this room, and open-heartedness. So if you feel comfortable, allow yourself to close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, then just softening your gaze, looking before you. And allow yourself just to settle into the room and into this particular moment. And you may experiment to see what it feels like to put 1 or 2 hands on your belly, right on your navel, allowing yourself to feel the place of contact between your hands and your belly. Maybe notice the natural rhythm of your breathing, so that when you breathe in, your belly gently rises. And when you breathe out, your belly falls. There's nothing to do right now except to connect to what it feels like to be a human being right now in this moment. Allowing yourself to breathe easy and naturally. You can also see what it's like to maybe to put 1 or 2 hands on your heart, noticing the place of contact of 1 or 2 hands on your heart. Again, you may be able to bring awareness to the natural rhythm of your breathing, so that you breathe in, your chest rises, and you breathe out, it falls. If either one of those forms of comforting touch feel good, you can continue to give yourself that. or you can just relax your hands and let them rest in your lap. And now what I'd like for you to do is to take a nice slow in breath, slow out breath, breathing in, breathing out. Maybe even counting to 5 on your in breath, counting to 5 on your out breath. Now keeping your eyes closed, but allowing your attention to relax. See if you can just notice the natural rhythm of your breath. You don't have to control it. Just the sensation of breathing in, breathing out. With your eyes closed, see if you can kind of smile at yourself. Maybe offering yourself silent, hi there, it's good to see you. Allowing your mouth just to smile a little bit as you notice your breathing. Being open to whatever arises in your body, whatever arises emotionally. If your mind starts to wander into thought and you notice that, you can just come back to your breath. Now imagine that you're smiling warmly at your heart, connecting directly with your heart. See if you can just smile gently with your heart. With your eyes closed, see if you can even soften your eyes, allowing your eyes to smile, keeping them closed, but just softening them. Allowing yourself to be open-hearted, breathing in and breathing out. And noticing the natural rhythm of your breath. Imagine that rhythm of your breathing is like this, it's like the sea and the ocean. Rhythm of your breath is just like the waves in the sea. And imagine that you're a raft that is just going along with the waves of your breath. Following the natural rhythm of your breathing, natural rhythm of the waves. And once more, let's see if we can bring our attention to our heart presence, allowing ourselves to really feel what's in our heart. There may be sense of peace or belonging, stillness. There may be some sadness or loneliness, maybe some anxiety. See if you can just open to whatever is in your heart. And responding with a smile towards your heart. So whether there's sadness or loneliness, feeling content or calm, smiling at that loneliness, smiling at that sense of calm, allowing yourself to say, I see you, I'm here for you. Once more, just notice the natural rhythm of your breath, breathing in and breathing out. If you're sitting in a chair, notice the place of contact of your feet with the floor. Maybe even wiggle your toes a little bit. If you're on a couch or a bed, notice the contact of your legs or your feet on the couch or bed. Bring awareness to the weight of your body against the chair or against the couch, against the bed. Allowing your shoulders to relax, your body to relax. Nothing to do but to be present with this moment. Then when you're ready, just kind of wiggle your toes a little bit, wiggle your fingers a little bit. Allow yourself to kind of blink your eyes and slowly come back into the room, back into this moment. What I would like, if you're willing, is to pause and to think about how what we just did may be a form of self-care. How this meditation, this heart presence meditation may be a form of self-care. If you feel comfortable, just typing into the chat how what we just did may be a form of self-care. When you type into the chat anything you're willing to share, Zeta will read that out loud for us.
Someone said interrupts the noise. Someone else says listening to your body and mind.
Love that. Listening to the body and the mind.
Mm-hmm. That's what we have so far.
So it is the interrupting the noise, the listening to the body and the mind. There's a sense of what the meditation teacher Thich Nhat Hanh would call coming home. That this connecting with ourselves is a way of coming home, coming back to our bodies, back to our lived experience, being present with our lives, connecting with our physical sensations, our feelings. We think about self-care, coming back to ourselves is almost always the first step because it allows us to be aware of what's going on with us in any particular moment. It allows us to connect with our experience. And if we connect with our experience and we notice that there is some difficult emotion or some source of physical pain, if there's even a small source of suffering, it also allows us to then respond with some kindness towards ourselves. And the response to suffering, the desire to alleviate suffering, is self-compassion. The core self-compassion question we can ask ourselves in any particular moment is, what do I need right now? If we check in with ourselves and we're feeling content and calm, safe, relaxed, we ask ourselves, what do I need? It may just be continue doing what I'm doing. Be present with this experience. Allow yourself to savor these good feelings. That might be what you need. If there's some difficulty or suffering, it might be that we need to just acknowledge that for ourselves, to validate that, which is called tender compassion, tender self-compassion. This idea of, I see you right now. I see that this moment is hard for you right now. I'm here for you. I care about you. It may be that when we ask, what do I need? That an actual action arises in our mind. This starts to move into more what we call, Kristen Neff would call, fierce self-compassion. This idea of taking action to protect ourselves, or to motivate ourselves, care for ourselves. So that when we drop into our bodies, and it can be as quickly as doing it for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, we're able to check in with ourselves. And this can become the foundation of our practice of self-care. The more that we do this throughout the course of our day, the more we're connected to our experience, the more we're aware of what's going on with us, and the more that we're able to care for ourselves. Okay, let me see if we come back to my PowerPoint, reconnect here with that. Let's see if I can. Okay. I very briefly want to differentiate between the difference of, if we're going to talk about self-care, I think it's good to start with, what do we mean by the self? Over on the left is how I tend to, a way that I think can be helpful to think about the self. Our mind creates a self to relate to the world, to organize and make sense of our experiences. It allows us to live in the world. Our self is continuously emerging moment to moment. In every moment that we're alive, the self is emerging as we interact with the world. So our self is both fluid, meaning that it's changing moment to moment, but there are also stable aspects of ourself that carry across moments. The self establishes boundaries between me and the world. The self is always exists in relationship to others, to other people, like how we know ourselves, what we know about ourselves, the language we speak, the values we hold. These are always in the context of relationship to others. Self is a way of knowing, who am I? It contains different parts. We have different parts in ourselves. We have different capacities, different inner resources and potentials. We connect the past and the present and the future through our sense of self. And there's different ways of relating to ourselves. So we can relate in a caring way, which would be self-care. We can relate with self-kindness. We can also relate with self-criticism, self-loathing or self-aversion. We can relate with self-compassion, self-love. We can relate with self-indulgence, self-appreciation, self-awareness. These are all examples of different ways we relate to the self. Selfing, on the other hand, is when we tell stories about ourselves, when we narrate stories about me, myself, and I. This is associated with kind of the middle of our brain, front to back, these different regions that have been called the default mode network. On average, most people are connected to what's happening in the present about 53% of the time, only about half the time. When we don't have something that we're focused on in the present, the default mode network tends to activate, and it's very self-referential. It's very much thinking about things that have happened to us in the past or things that might happen in the future. It's very much focused on, how am I doing in my life? What's going on with my life? It's very much focused on, what are others thinking? Now these are self-referential thoughts that can often cause us distress, because there's a lot of negativity bias in that thinking. But the default mode network is also involved when we imagine, theory of mind, what other people are thinking. So it's really important for empathy and compassion towards others. Default mode network is also activated when we're using our imagination. So it's very important for creativity. In sharing this, I just want to note that when we are not to try to be aware of when we're relating to self and when we're relating to stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And there is a difference there.
Eric, we have a question in the chat
Uh-huh.
that's related.
Mhm. What's the question?
It says, is this why very elderly folks often live in self-narrating mode?
So I think that I think that all human beings have um, inner inner drive or impulse to the default mode network helps us create meaning in our life and for ourselves. And I think as we move towards the end of life, there is greater attention to making sense of ourselves in our life. And I do think that there's, you know, as life slows down for us, and as if we're not actively engaging, like when folks retire, I've done a few presentations on retirement. If retirement is something where you remain really active, engaged with learning and social to the extent that you're physically healthy, able to do those things, you still have a lot that your mind can focus, attend to. But for a lot of folks, as we get older, our friends and family die. We have less relationships. We often have restricted mobility. We have maybe less sensory experiences, less general experiences. And I think there's both kind of a human need to make sense of our lives, which becomes acute as we get closer to death. But I also think that when there's less things for us to focus on, we know that the default network is going to kick in and we're going to focus on ourselves more. If we, hopefully that answered the question. Um, if we look at this graph, if over on the left, just think to yourself, um, for each one of these things, what is one way you would provide care for each one of the items on the left? So how would you care for a plant? And you don't have to say it out loud or write it down, just note for yourself. How would I care for a plant? What's something I might do? How might I care for my pet? What about for a stranger? What's a way that I care for a work colleague? How about a parent or a grandparent? If you have children, how do I care for my children? Or if you interact with children, how would I care for a child? How would I care for a sibling or a friend? What's an example of how I would care for my partner? And now just let's make that shift of how do I care for myself? What are ways that I care for myself? Sometimes when folks do this exercise, what can be, if you pause and reflect, a lot of times folks that are listed on human living beings that are listed on the left, right, are top priorities for us. Like there's very few of us, if we have children, that say, you know, I'll get to my child, you know, when the weekend comes or during my next work vacation. I don't have time for my child right now. Or I'll worry about my partner, you know, um, when Friday comes around. I'm not going to worry about them today. There's probably several, I would say probably for a lot of us, there's more than several people that we are caring for regularly. Yet when we think about our own self-care, it's very common for us to say, I don't have time to care for myself. I got to take care of these work and my family and other people. I'll care for myself the last 10 minutes of my day before I go to sleep. Or I'll care for myself on Sunday. Or I'll care for myself when I go on vacation to Florida next month. One of the things I would encourage everyone here to do is to embrace the view that your needs are as important as any other living being's needs. Your needs are not more important than others' needs, but they're as important. And it's really important to bring ourselves into the circle of kindness and care, to acknowledge that our needs matter just as much as the needs of others. If we think about simple definitions for self-care, self-care is any activity that we do deliberately to take care of our mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual health. It is not a selfish act. It's a caring act. It gives us the capacity, we're a living being like any other living being. Um, Very few of us would say, that child in my home doesn't deserve to be cared for. Um, most of us, probably all of us would say that child deserves to be loved. Well, we also deserve to be loved. This is not selfishness. Effective self-care is rooted in discipline, which means that we make it part of our daily practice, that it's not something that we just do when we're feeling bad or that we just do when we're on vacation, but that we start to develop habits and practices and routines, that we're intentional about our self-care. Kristen Neff, the psychologist, notes that people's biggest barrier to self-care and self-compassion is their fear that they're being selfish or self-indulgent. There's a strong cultural narrative that many of us grow up with, that to care for ourselves is a selfish act and that we shouldn't do it. And so many of us are socialized that. And there's also a strong gender component to this, right? I mean, there's a lot of gender socialization that women's role is to care for their children or their husband or their partner, that this is more important than their own care. So there's a gender aspect to this as well. But when you look at the levels of self-compassion in the general population, the difference in gender between men and women is not as big as you might think. There is a difference, but both men and women really struggle with consistently caring for themselves and being compassionate towards themselves. Why is self-care hard when we're stressed? Well, when we're under stress, our body is experiencing it as a threat. And so our brains can go into fight, freeze, or flight mode. And this is all on a spectrum. So there can be low level fight mode and there can be a high level fight mode. There can be a low level freeze, high level freeze. When we are stressed and we start to release stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, we start to go into fight, freeze, flight, our perspective narrows. We tend to be really focused on the threat, what we perceive as the threat, which sometimes the threat is just an emotional threat or a relational threat, doesn't mean it's a physical threat. When we focus on the threat, and we become and we can become myopic, where we just don't see much beyond that threat. And our sense of how we can respond becomes limited. We can get caught up in thinking about how we're going to solve or fix this problem, this threat. And this can be described as doing mode, this idea of completing a task, of solving a problem. Doing mode is important. It's something we all do in our jobs every day. It's things that we do, anytime we do the laundry or we mow our lawn, we're in doing mode. But there's lots of times we're in doing mode where there is no real easy fix for the problem or the threat. And we can get stuck in that. And we can spend all of our hours thinking about problems that we need to fix. And this keeps us stuck in a kind of arousal state, that fight or flight mode, which is stressful and hard on our body. Being mode is when we connect to the full range of our experience, where we say, what am I feeling? Like, not what am I thinking about this problem and how I need to fix it, but what am I feeling? Physically, what am I feeling? Emotionally, what am I feeling? What kind of thoughts are arising for me? What am I believing about this situation? Being mode is where we're not trying to solve the problem. It's not goal directed. It's just seeking understanding and direct connection with our experience. It's about being aware of what's going on. Radical acceptance means that I accept this is what my experience is right now. It doesn't mean I approve of it. Like, if something bad happens to us, radical acceptance doesn't mean I approve of this bad thing happening to us. It just means that I accept this is what my experience is right now. And it's being curious. Why this is important is because a lot of times we can't think our way out of what we're feeling. Like, something is causing us some emotional pain. And often we want to try to think of what's the solution? What can I do to make this pain go away? Often we have to allow ourselves to feel our way through what we're feeling. And that's what being mode is about, is being present. So for me, when I'm really stressed out, that's the time I least want to go meditate. It's also a time I know I most need to go meditate. So I'm really stressed out, I force myself to go outside. One of the ways I remember that is when you can feel things that are accelerating in your body, or tension is building in your body, time is speeding up, you feel like there's not enough time in the day, you can see this as an opportunity to intentionally create some calm in your body. We'll get into different techniques. One of them is meditation of breath. This third point here at the bottom is that it can be helpful to have a list of go-to self-care activities, because sometimes it can be hard to think in the moment when you're under stress. If we think about self-care from a psychological perspective, here are some core elements of psychological well-being: positive emotions, engagement in things that interest us, healthy relationships, finding meaning and purpose, and being able to pursue things that give us a sense of accomplishment. I like to start off with spiritual self-care because I think it's important that we can go through our day-to-day lives without really spending a lot of time thinking about what matters most to us. What do we value? So spirituality can be understood as believing and connecting with something bigger than yourself. Examples include connecting to humanity, to knowledge, to religious faith, vocational work, nature, creating art. These are all ways that we can connect to something bigger than ourselves. Knowing what our values are is really important, because then we can start to be intentional about making decisions and acting in ways that are consistent with our values. I've italicized this point from Kristen Neff, that when we prioritize what we do and how we live based on our values, we find satisfaction in the present moment and our daily lives. We're less afraid to try new things and fail. If we try new things that are consistent with our values, we're less afraid to fail, because we say, this is important. I'm going to do the best I can because this matters to me. And if I fail, I'll try again. When we know what matters to us, then all of a sudden our daily lives become really significant and very much enriched. We're not waiting to achieve something into the future. We're living in accordance with what matters with us right now. And that really improves our quality of life and our sense of self-care. Protecting your time, giving yourself time for reflection. That kind of comes back to our opening exercise, dropping into yourself. Time to step out away from stress. Time to experience and try new things so you can grow as a person. Time to enjoy life. All of this is really important. And for many of us, it's important that we don't over-identify with our paid work. If our paid work is consuming all of our focus and energy, our life is going to feel really out of balance. And there's a good chance that we're going to be living a life that's not consistent with our values. I shared this graph, and again, it will be in a PowerPoint so you can come back to it. Here's just a list of 70 or 80 values. I encourage folks to identify, what are your top values? Think about, what are your top 10, what are your top 3? And then think about, how do I live my values? How do they show up in my life? If you can kind of go through and define what your values are, like what your top values are, your own meaning of what they mean to you, how you live them, you can then start to say, is there a way that I can make decisions or modify my life that's more consistent with my values? That often can reduce feelings of anxiety or discontent, or feelings of restlessness. It can often increase feelings of security, sense of belonging, sense of purpose. Quality of our life goes up, and suddenly we can start to make decisions that, when they're consistent with our values, it's a way of caring for ourselves. Physical self-care, I'm not really going to go much into this, but what I would like to say is that a lot of folks come to me as a therapist, and they're stressed and they're anxious and they're depressed. And one of the main problems is that they're not getting quality sleep, which is highly correlated to anxiety and stress and depression. If you don't get quality sleep, we need quality sleep to learn new things. We need it for energy. We need it to tolerate stress. We also have a lot of folks that are living very sedentary lives. They're not getting outside. They're not getting movement. So what I would say is, it's really important to prioritize these things. These things are as important as sleep and movement are as important as like eating healthy food and drinking water. Also having time for relaxation, being intentional about it. Our bodies evolved where majority of our hours were spent with downtime for most of the existence of human beings. It's only really since the Middle Ages, capitalism, that we work most of our waking days, or that we're in doing mode most of our waking days. So creating opportunities just to be present with our experience matters. Completing the stress cycle, um, there's these core ways to release stress in our body. Physical activity, creativity, doing creative things means it could be just being playful or making jokes. Um, Laughing, like laughter, we probably all know is a great way to relieve stress. So is crying, allowing yourself to cry. Physical affection, structured breathing, and then connecting with others. When we connect with others, and especially if someone can really listen to us without necessarily giving advice, if they can just be present with us, that releases oxytocin in us and them, that bonding chemical, that stress hormone that reduces stress. So reaching out to others is important. Emotional self-care, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that life is made up of both pleasant and positive, as well as difficult and painful emotions. Often, many of us act when we experience some kind of difficult emotion or difficult life situation like something is wrong. Like, what's happening? Why am I feeling this way? Like, why am I feeling sad, or why I'm feeling lonely? Why am I feeling frustrated? Why am I feeling hurt? Why is this person, being mean to me? Or why is this not working out? We act like, these kind of difficult life situations, difficult emotions, like if we experience them, that there's something wrong with us. The reality is this is what it is to be human. We all experience these painful emotions. We all experience disappointments. We all have bodies that get older, that age. We all die. We all have people that we love that die. So this is part of life. And so this opening up, emotional self-care, it can be understood as both cultivating positive emotions, but then also honoring our range of emotions and our emotional needs. We all have the needs to be loved, to feel safe, to live with ease, to feel some happiness, to belong. So this idea of emotional self-care is tuning into our emotions, relating to our emotions with openness, with non-judgment, with curiosity. Our emotions are a source of self-awareness, a source of self-knowledge, trying to respond to ourselves when we're suffering. I mentioned we all have some core fears, or I actually mentioned our universal needs, which also kind of align with core fears, or fears of death, fears of rejection, fears of loss of control. It's important when we're experiencing these strong fears that we acknowledge them to ourselves. Okay, I know what this is. This is fear of not being good enough. Savoring positive emotions, tuning into things that bring us joy or connection or love. Really important. Making space for anger and fear, anxiety. Allowing yourself to feel these things, naming what we're feeling them. We know when we name our emotions, it actually calms down activity in the emotional center of our brain, the amygdala. So we can say to ourselves, there's some anger here. This belongs. There's some sadness here. This belongs. Allowing the emotions to be, you don't have to react to them, but naming them, honoring them, saying, where can I feel them in my body? Let me breathe into them. We know that when we resist difficult emotions, if we say, I don't want to feel sad, I don't want to feel hurt, that the emotions often intensify, or we can get stuck in them. Cultivating positive emotions. Here are some strategies. I don't have time to go through all of these. Some of these are pretty straightforward if you look at them. They're all evidence-based practices. We've already talked about savoring the good. We've already talked about forest bathing. We've talked about the benefits of connecting to the present. We know that when our mind wanders into thought, the more people's mind wanders away from the present, the more stressed out they are and unsatisfied they are with life. It can be helpful to acknowledge to ourselves every day, to do this with our kids. Let's do a what went well exercise. Tell me 5 things or 10 things that went well today. Psychological pulling weeds and planting flowers. This is if a disturbing memory or a painful memory arises, allowing yourself to acknowledge it, to say, okay, I see, I remember this. I'm hurting. This is difficult for me. Connecting to it, not pushing it away, naming what we're feeling. But then within the next 30 minutes, trying to bring to your mind an experience that's the direct opposite. So if we're thinking about something where we felt rejected, see if the next 30 minutes if you can then bring into an experience of when you felt cared for or accepted. What you're doing, you're not denying the negative experience or the negative memory, but you're also not letting it be one-sided. You're reminding yourself that life is full of both pain and suffering, but also joy. And then if you do this practice, your mind then consolidates those memories together. So that's a more balanced sense of self in the world. Okay, this is just a list of positive emotions. It just lets you know there's a lot more positive emotion than just happiness. Intellectual self-care, I mentioned the default mode network earlier. Ways that if we notice that we're really stuck in a lot of ruminating thoughts or worries, we can just practice noticing our thoughts, like you would notice clouds going through the sky. Let me just notice what I'm thinking. We can even thank ourselves. We can say, "Thank you, mind, for such a interesting thought that this plane I'm going to take might crash and I'm going to die. Thank you for such an interesting thought." We may just repeat to ourselves, "I'm having the thought that the plane around crash and die. I'm noticing that I'm having this thought. I'm noticing that I'm noticing I'm having this thought." In each one of these types of diffusion exercises, you create some space between you and your thought, and they lose a lot of the power. We can also shift our attention, which is mindful regulation of attention. We can move to things that interest us, that are consistent with our values. We can drop into our bodies to reset, to come out of our thoughts and into our bodies. We can meditate on our breath or sounds. We can give ourselves a self-compassion break where we say, all right, now I'm suffering. How can I care for myself? Check our time. I know we're running up on it. Social self-care is really about prioritizing healthy relationships, not avoiding conflict, setting healthy boundaries, but it also is about reaching out to others when we struggle. This is one of the most important ways human beings care for themselves, is to reach out to others who are supportive and caring. Achievement self-care is this idea that you set goals that are consistent with your values, but that you really embrace the process. That it's not about like I have to be the best at something or I have to achieve something. It's that I'm working, whatever I'm doing, I'm trying to do something that I'm doing it because it's important to me, because it's something that matters to me. We can experiment with new roles and new ways of being, knowing that we're going to make mistakes, knowing that there's going to be failure. We can see our failures not as like, oh, game over, but that if we're trying something new that's based on something that's important to us, failure is just information. It's just the start of a new journey. Okay, I tried this, didn't work. I'm going to try it different. I try it again, maybe in a different way. It's through coming back to it that I grow as a person. That's the growth mindset. Letting go of perfectionism. Many of us are perfectionists. So this idea of practicing being good enough, really important. Only comparing yourself to yourself, not to others. Comparing yourself, recognizing you have your own journey, your own growth. When we compare ourselves to others, there's that saying, compare and despair. It almost always comes back where we feel inadequate or we feel like we're not good enough. Over on the left, we have some social roles that we can pursue for achievement that are safe. It's kind of like, all right, I feel safe being a helper or being, not taking risks so I don't fail, or being someone who's working behind the scenes. Over on the right, we have taking on roles that are making you more vulnerable, but this is how we grow. So this is being willing to learn from others, to seek help from others. This is being willing to try new things and take risks, knowing that growth entails failing. This is part of growing, is failing. It means collaborating with others and being visible. And all right, I actually got through all the slides. We have about probably 2 minutes for any follow-up questions, but I appreciate you all letting me be here and do this presentation. Is that